The rain was heavy with thunderstorms. Despite his expensive suit and $2 million diamond wristwatch, Ademola jumped out of his car and carried Adetola, who stood in the rain, shivering with dirty old clothes that couldn't cover her body properly. "Miss, what were you doing in the rain without an umbrella? You should have found a place to sit until the rain stopped. You could be harmed, you know. And you are too beautiful for this rain to mess you up like this. Sir, I don't know you. Why are you helping me? Are you a ritualist? No one ever stops to help me. They all drive past, pretending I don't exist." Ademola's heart ached at her words. He stepped closer, holding out his hand. "I promise you, I'm not a ritualist. My name is Ademola, and I believe in helping those in need. My mother taught me that kindness is the greatest wealth of all. Please, let me help you." Reluctantly, Adetola accepted his hand, and he guided her into the car. He draped his suit jacket over her shoulders. "Please, sit comfortably and use my suit to cover your body. You must be feeling cold," Ademola said. As they drove, Adetola shared her story, her voice trembling with emotion. "By the way, where are you going if I can drop you off before going home? I have all the time for you today. I will be your driver today before I go home," Ademola said, smiling. He was surprised when Adetola told him he wasn't going anywhere because he doesn't have a place to stay. Adetola had once been a bright, hopeful girl, a daughter of a business mogul from Ogun State. Her parents were hard-working business moguls who had sacrificed everything to give her an education. She had dreams of becoming a data analyst and software engineer, a career that would allow her to uplift her parents' business. But fate had other plans. One fateful day, her parents were involved in a tragic accident on their way to an occasion. Adetola was teary when he narrated how her parents died from the tragic accident that cut short her dream. They succumbed to their injuries, leaving Adetola alone in the world. She had no option and decided to relocate to the village where she lived with her aunt. She could not cope due to her aunt's maltreatment and had to relocate back to the city. With no one to turn to, she sold her father's land in the village and used the money to travel to Lagos, hoping to find opportunities in the bustling city. But the city was unforgiving. She struggled to find work, and soon, her money ran out. For 3 months, she had been living under the bridge in Lagos, surviving on scraps and the occasional kindness of strangers. Ademola listened in silence, his heart breaking with every word. He couldn't fathom how someone so intelligent and resilient had been reduced to such a state. He never imagined a human being could go through all that Adetola had gone through and still speak good English and appear intelligent. He had made up his mind, he would help Adetola rebuild her life. He assured her of his support, promised to be her family, and change her story. Adetola cried out of joy and had to be consoled by Ademola. She imagined if it was a dream and silently prayed this should last long. "By the way, what is your name? Forgive my manners that I haven't asked since I was too carried away with your story, and I forgot. My name is Adetola. I am from Ogun State, and I am a Yoruba Nigerian." Ademola was surprised when he heard Adetola's name. "My name is Ademola, and I believe there's a strong reason God directed me to help you today. I pray it's a good reason, and I would be able to support you and give you all the help you need." When Ademola got home, his billionaire mother, Mrs. Fumi, was surprised to see a strange young lady with dirty clothes, wearing his son's jacket. Without saying a word, Mrs. Fumi called Ademola inside the inner room to ask him some questions. But before he left, she greeted Adetola and asked her to sit down and make herself comfortable. "You didn't tell me you would be coming home with someone. Who's that young lady? She doesn't appear to be a colleague," Mrs. Fumi asked Ademola. "Mummy, this is Adetola. I met her on my way home. She was in the rain with no one to help her. I decided to help as you have always taught me and bring her home for your motherly love and kindness. Mummy, she's an orphan and has been sleeping under the bridge. She deserves our sympathy. If this is the case, then she indeed needs our support." suggested registering Adetola for a therapy session because of the trauma she had gone through and the pain she had endured for years. She believed it was the first step to take for her to be mentally balanced to start a new beginning. 3 months later, Adetola was done with her therapy session. She now helps with the domestic chores at home and completely looks different because of the transformation. During weekends, Ademola now goes out with her for hangouts, talking about village life and what it means to live in the village with limited access to basic social amenities. That evening, Ademola had a long conversation with his mother. As he gave her an update about the family company, he convinced his mother to hire Adetola to take the position of data analyst in the company. Mrs. Fumi didn't think twice before she gave her approval for Adetola to be hired to fill the vacant position. She had taken a 6-month certification course on data analysis after she finished her therapy session. Adetola was called to inform her of the development, and all she could do was burst into tears, as she had never imagined a day like that would come. Adetola, since the day my son brought you here, you have been amazing, diligent, respectful, and hard-working. You are brilliant and smart. It was quite unfortunate you had to endure what you went through despite being so brilliant. Ademola is my only son, and I couldn't say no to what he wanted. Mrs. Fumi said and promised to render more support whenever the need arises. 2 days later, Adetola resumed her new role in the company, and everything still seemed like a dream to her, but she promised to do her best to deliver and live her best life even if she ever discovered it was all a dream. Ademola and Adetola now go to the office together, and this gives them more time to talk about life. Everything was moving fine for Adetola, but something strange happened that took the joy away, and she wished she had never met Ademola. That day, after the close of work, Ademola suggested they relax at an eatery and have a nice time before going home. Adetola agreed. At the sit-out, Ademola told Adetola he had never visited the village and would want her to take him to her village for sightseeing and experience what it means to live in the village. Adetola agreed, but on the condition that Mrs. Fumi will accept the idea and give consent. They informed Mrs. Fumi when they reached home. She was not comfortable with the idea, but Ademola insisted on traveling, and Adetola assured Mrs. Fumi that there's no security threat at her village, and she gave her consent. Early in the morning, they set out and started the trip to Ifedelu village, a 4-hour journey from where they live in Lagos City. 2 hours into the journey, they heard a loud sound that hit the car and threw them off balance. It was a gunshot that burst the 2 front tires. As they managed to stop in the middle of nowhere, fierce-looking kidnappers emerged from the bush. They shot sporadically and eventually took Ademola into the bush. They told the driver and Adetola to go back home and source for ransom to bail him. As they drove back home without Ademola, Adetola cried her eyes out and wanted to die as she imagined how she will tell Mrs. Fumi that her only son has been taken away into the forest by kidnappers. Adetola regretted the day she met Ademola. She knew Mrs. Fumi wouldn't believe her and would do anything because of her son. As Adetola entered the living room with a swollen face and looking unkempt, knew something was wrong and immediately jumped up to ask what the problem was. As Adetola told Mrs. Fumi that her son had been kidnapped, she didn't wait for her to finish before she landed a hot slap on her face and asked her to produce her only son. I didn't know where you hailed from. I helped you, accommodated you, and gave you a job. The best you could do is set my only son up and get him kidnapped. Adetola, or whatever your name is, you will regret ever doing this, you greedy little thing, because we are wealthy, and you wanted to take money from us. I will make sure I destroy your life if that will make you produce my son unhurt. Mrs. Fumi called the police, who arrived a few minutes later, and Adetola was arrested, handcuffed, and taken into custody for questioning. 5 days later, Adetola was still in prison, beaten into a coma and manhandled by the police in a bid to make her confess even when she repeatedly said she was innocent. Mrs. Fumi refused to believe Adetola doesn't have hands in her son's kidnapping even when the kidnappers called and demanded 500 million naira for them to release him. She was not ready to pay the money and believed the police could make Adetola confess and call the people involved. The following day, The kidnappers called while beating Ademola and gave him a phone to speak with his mother. It was after he pleaded with his mother that she bargained with them and paid 100 million naira that made them release him. Adetola was released from the prison, but Mrs. Fumi told her not to come to her house anymore or dare to pick anything. She said every time she called her own was bought with her money and sent her away. Mrs. Fumi picked Ademola from the spot the kidnappers dropped him and was immediately rushed to the hospital. He was a shadow of himself. The 2 weeks he spent in their custody were enough to change his look, and Mrs. Fumi couldn't control her tears and further cursed Adetola for trying to ruin her life. Ademola was admitted and slept a moment after the drip was fixed for him. When Ademola woke up, he held his mother's hand tightly and thanked her for saving his life with tears. On his bed, he looked around and asked where Adetola was. His mother looked away. It was after he asked for the 3rd time that his mother told him she had driven her away for arranging his abduction. "No, Mummy. No. This can't happen. Adetola can't do that to me. She can't do such a thing against me. Mummy, Adetola can't do it," he said with tears. But Mrs. Fumi doesn't want to listen to Ademola's story. She has made her decision, and that's final. Adetola went back to the street with no hope and nothing to hold on to. After a moment of enjoyment with luxury life, she now had to go back to the underbridge where she was picked from. As she sat with her only clothes, without phone or money, she cried her eyes out and imagined what she did wrong that God decided to punish her. On the hospital bed, Ademola tried Adetola's number repeatedly but kept bouncing back. At the underbridge, Adetola was nearly raped at night by some bad boys but managed to escape and stayed awake throughout the night. In the morning, she realized she could make a withdrawal from her bank without her ATM card. She had been messed up that she almost suffered amnesia. At the bank, she withdrew 500,000 naira from her account, bought new clothes, and bought a new phone with a new SIM card. She thereafter went to the hospital, where she was admitted for 3 days. Ademola had been trying to reach Adetola after he was discharged from the hospital. He used every possible means but was unsuccessful. Before leaving the hospital, Adetola rented a house and a shop where she now sells women's wear. 1 month after Ademola was released, the kidnappers were arrested in one of the banks they went to make a withdrawal. Unknown to the kidnappers, Mrs. Fumi reached out to the central bank and gave her special note with a mark, which she paid to them, and the CBN directed commercial banks to arrest whoever comes to deposit such currency. The kidnappers were paraded on national TV. When asked who recruited them for the job, they insisted they were not recruited by anyone and had been doing the job for 6 years. It was at this that Mrs. Fumi realized wronged Adetola and punished her wrongly. That evening, Mrs. Fumi calmly told Ademola that she had wronged Adetola and punished her wrongly. "Ademola, I was wrong and punished the poor girl for nothing. I arrested her, and the police tortured her for what she didn't do. Please do what you can to locate her. I need to apologize to her and seek her forgiveness," Mrs. Fumi said with tears. "But Mummy, you should have known better. I know your love for me made you go overboard. I will try and look for her at least to tell her she didn't deserve what you did to her." The following day, Ademola couldn't get his mind off Adetola and searched through the town for her but was unsuccessful. On his way home, he met Bumi, Adetola's friend, and quickly stopped to speak with her. Bumi was hard on Ademola and refused to give Adetola's new number to him. She blamed his mother for accusing her friend wrongly and wanted to kill her for a crime she didn't do. After several pleadings and explanations, Bumi gave him Adetola's number. He called her immediately, but Adetola ended the call and warned him to never call her line. He had to plead with Bumi to take him to Adetola's house. When they reached it, it took the efforts of Bumi before she allowed Ademola to enter the house. Ademola apologized to Adetola and begged for her forgiveness. "I know you are pained. You were accused wrongly, humiliated, and punished for what you can't even imagine talking more of doing. Adetola, I know you can't even speak ill of me, not to talk of harming me. My mother was wrong, she has realized it, and she is begging for your forgiveness. Please forgive her, forgive us, and come back home." She allowed her emotions to take the best part of her. She cried this morning and told me to look for you to beg for your forgiveness. When Ademola finished, Adetola burst into tears and hugged him tightly. I have missed you. I was punished wrongly, and the police nearly killed me. Ademola, I went back to sleep under the bridge. I was nearly raped. Look at the bruises on my hands and my thigh. I was punished like a killer and humiliated, Adetola said, crying. She agreed to follow Ademola to the house. It was an emotional moment when Mrs. Fumi saw Adetola. She couldn't hold back her tears as she begged her for forgiveness and hugged her tightly. Adetola forgave Mrs. Fumi but rejected the offer to return back to the house despite several pleas and persuasions. She also rejected the offer of getting her job back at the family's company and said she's better off managing her clothing business. But Mrs. Fumi insisted and told her to think over it. Before she left, Ademola went inside the room, and when he returned, he knelt down and proposed to Adetola and asked her to be his wife. In the presence of Mrs. Fumi and Bumi, Adetola said yes to the proposal. They sang for them as she stretched her finger for the Ademola to put the $1 million diamond ring on her finger with a kiss. In the following weeks, Adetola agreed to return back to Mrs. Fumi's house. She was convinced it was the right thing to do, especially now that she's going to be part of the family very soon. She also resumed her duty at the family's company and worked closely with Ademola to promote the company and win more contracts. As Adetola settled into her new life, she began to uncover fragments of her past that she had long forgotten. One evening, while sorting through an old box of belongings she had salvaged from her village, she found a faded photograph of her parents with a man she didn't recognize. The man was dressed in a sharp suit, and the photo was taken in front of a luxurious building. On the back of the photo was a handwritten note, "To my dearest brother, may our bond never break. Femi." Curiosity gnawed at her. Who was Femi? And why had her parents never mentioned him? Determined to find answers, Adetola began to dig deeper. She reached out to an old family friend in the village, who revealed a shocking truth. Femi was her uncle, her father's younger brother. He had moved to Lagos years ago and became a successful businessman. But there had been a falling out between the brothers, and they had cut ties. Adetola's heart raced. If she had an uncle in Lagos, why had he never reached out to her after her parents' death? Was he even alive? She decided to find him, hoping that reconnecting with family might bring her a sense of closure. Meanwhile, Ademola's life was not without its own complications. His childhood friend, Tolu, had returned to Lagos after years of studying abroad. Tolu was the daughter of a wealthy politician, and she had always harbored feelings for Ademola. When she learned that he was engaged to Adetola, a woman she deemed beneath him, she was furious. Tolu began to scheme, determined to drive a wedge between Ademola and Adetola. She started by spreading rumors about Adetola's past, suggesting that she was a gold digger who had manipulated Ademola into marrying her. She even went as far as fabricating evidence, creating fake social media profiles to make it seem like Adetola was still in contact with the kidnappers. Ademola, torn between his love for Adetola and the doubts Tolu had planted, began to question everything. He confronted Adetola, demanding to know the truth. Hurt and betrayed, Adetola lashed out. "After everything we've been through, you would believe her over me. I thought you knew me better than that." The tension between them grew, threatening to destroy their relationship. As if their personal struggles weren't enough, Ademola's company was facing a crisis. A rival corporation, led by a ruthless businessman named Chief Adebayo, was trying to take over Mrs. Fumi's empire. Chief Adebayo had a personal vendetta against the family, stemming from a failed business deal years ago. Adetola, now working as a data analyst at the company, stumbled upon evidence of Chief Adebayo's illegal activities. She discovered that he had been embezzling funds and bribing government officials to gain an unfair advantage. But when she tried to bring this information to Ademola, she was met with skepticism. Chief Adebayo was a powerful man, and taking him down would not be easy. Determined to protect the company and prove her loyalty, Adetola decided to investigate further. She enlisted the help of Bumi, her loyal friend, and together they uncovered a web of corruption that went all the way to the top. But their investigation put them in grave danger. Chief Adebayo's henchmen began to follow them, and one night, they were ambushed. Adetola and Bumi were kidnapped and taken to an abandoned warehouse. Chief Adebayo himself appeared, his cold eyes filled with malice. "You should have stayed out of my business," he sneered. "Now, you'll pay the price." Adetola's mind raced. She had to find a way to escape. Using her wits, she managed to distract the guards and free herself and Bumi. They fled into the night, narrowly escaping their captors. When Adetola finally reached Ademola, she was battered and bruised but determined. She showed him the evidence she had gathered, and together, they devised a plan to expose Chief Adebayo's crimes. The confrontation with Chief Adebayo was intense. Ademola and Adetola presented their evidence to the authorities, but Chief Adebayo fought back with every resource at his disposal. He tried to bribe officials, intimidate witnesses, and even threatened Ademola's family. But Adetola refused to back down. She testified in court, her voice steady and unwavering. Her bravery inspired others to come forward and testify, and soon, Chief Adebayo's empire began to crumble. In the end, he was arrested and sentenced to prison for his crimes. The ordeal brought Ademola and Adetola closer than ever. Ademola realized how much he had underestimated her strength and resilience. He apologized for doubting her and vowed to stand by her side no matter what. Tolu, seeing the depth of their love, finally gave up her schemes. She left Lagos, hoping to start a find she can love again and start her family. A few months later, Ademola moved his relationship with Adetola to another level and told her he would want them to get married the following month. Their wedding became the best wedding of the year, as they got married in a grand wedding ceremony with business moguls, influential politicians, friends, family, and even Adetola's long-lost uncle, Femi. He had been searching for her for years and was overjoyed to finally reunite. He apologized for the family rift and promised to make amends. As Ademola and Adetola exchanged vows, the room was filled with tears of joy. Their love had overcome betrayal, danger, and what would have destroyed them, proving that true love knows no bounds. One evening, as Adetola was sorting through her belongings, she found an old, dusty journal that had belonged to her father. Inside, she discovered a series of cryptic notes about a trust fund and a guardian who was supposed to watch over her in case anything happened to her parents. The journal mentioned a man named Mr. Adewale, a lawyer in Lagos who had been entrusted with managing the fund. Confused and intrigued, Adetola decided to seek out Mr. Adewale. She shared the discovery with Ademola, who offered to accompany her to the lawyer's office. When they arrived, they were met with resistance. Mr. Adewale was hesitant to speak with them, his face was pale, and his hands trembled. "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss this matter," Mr. Adewale said, avoiding eye contact. "It's complicated." Ademola stepped forward, his voice was firm. "Complicated or not, Adetola deserves to know the truth. Her parents entrusted you with this responsibility. You owe her that much." After a long pause, Mr. Adewale sighed and reluctantly agreed to explain. He revealed that Adetola's father had been a silent partner in a lucrative oil business years ago. When her parents died, the business partners had conspired to cut Adetola out of her inheritance, fearing that a young orphan would be easy to manipulate. Mr. Adewale had been too afraid to come forward, fearing retaliation from the powerful men involved. Adetola was stunned. "All these years, I've been struggling to survive, and I had a right to this inheritance. Why didn't you help me?" Mr. Adewale hung his head in shame. "I was a coward. But if you're willing to fight for what's yours, I'll help you now." Adetola and Ademola decided to pursue the truth, but they quickly realized they were up against a famous business mogul, Chief Olumide, a wealthy and ruthless businessman who had been her father's partner. Chief Olumide had built an empire on the profits of the oil business, and he wasn't about to let Adetola claim her share. Ademola and Adetola began gathering evidence, but Chief Olumide was always one step ahead. He hired thugs to intimidate them, and one night, their home was broken into. Adetola's journal and the documents Mr. Adewale had given her were stolen. "This isn't just about money anymore," Ademola said, his voice tense. "He's trying to erase your family's legacy. We can't let him win." Adetola nodded. Her determination was unmatched as she resolved to fight to reclaim what belongs to her. "I won't let my parents' sacrifices be in vain. We'll fight him, no matter what it takes." Meanwhile, Tolu, Ademola's childhood friend, saw an opportunity to exploit the situation. She reached out to Chief Olumide, offering to help him discredit Adetola in exchange for a share of the business. Together, they concocted a plan to frame Adetola for embezzlement, using forged documents to make it seem like she had stolen money from Ademola's company. When the accusations surfaced, Ademola was torn. He wanted to believe Adetola, but the evidence was damning. The media picked up the story, and Adetola's reputation was dragged through the mud. Adetola confronted Ademola, her eyes blazing with anger and hurt. "How could you believe them? After everything we've been through, you think I would betray you like this?" Ademola hesitated, his voice was shaking as he talked. "I don't want to believe it, but the evidence, it's hard to ignore." Adetola shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "If you can't trust me, then maybe we don't belong together after all." As Adetola walked away, she was approached by Chief Olumide's thugs. They kidnapped her and took her to a remote location, where Chief Olumide made his demands clear: she would sign over her rights to the inheritance, or she would never see Ademola again. Adetola refused, her defiance only angering Chief Olumide further. He ordered his men to teach her a lesson, and they began to beat her mercilessly. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, she heard a loud crash. Ademola had tracked her location with the help of Mr. Adewale and the police. A fierce struggle ensued, and Ademola fought off the thugs with everything he had. He managed to free Adetola, but not before Chief Olumide pulled out a gun. In a moment of desperation, Ademola threw himself in front of Adetola, taking the bullet meant for her. Ademola was rushed to the hospital, his life hanging in the balance. When his billionaire mother, Mrs. Fumi, heard of it, she rushed to the hospital with tears and vowed to use everything within her reach to fight those responsible. Adetola refused to leave his side, her heart breaking with every labored breath he took. As she sat by his bed, she whispered, "Please, don't leave me. I can't lose you too." Miraculously, Ademola survived. He regained consciousness after 4 days of being in a coma. When he woke up, the first thing he saw was Adetola's tears dropping on his hands. He reached for her hand, his voice was weak but filled with love. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you. You're the strongest, most incredible person I've ever known. I love you, Adetola." Adetola smiled through her tears. "I love you too. And I'm not going anywhere." With Ademola's recovery, they turned their attention to bringing Chief Olumide to justice. They gathered all the evidence they could, including testimony from Mr. Adewale and the thugs who had turned on Chief Olumide. The case went to court, and after a tense trial, Chief Olumide was found guilty of fraud, kidnapping, and attempted murder and sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment. Adetola's parents' share, worth $1 million, was given to her by the court. As he was led away in handcuffs, Adetola felt a sense of closure. Her parents' legacy had been restored, and she could finally move forward with her life. It was the 5th anniversary of their wedding. The ceremony was attended by friends, family, and even Mr. Adewale, who had become a trusted ally. As Ademola and Adetola renewed their vows, the room was filled with tears of joy. Their love had overcome betrayal, danger, and what would have broken them. But they have only one prayer. They prayed for the fruit of the womb, and Adetola cried while praying to God to make her a mother and feel the joy of motherhood. Mrs. Fumi never ceases to love and support her, She assured her God will bless her womb because she deserves to be happy with all she has gone through. For later, Adetola became pregnant, and Ademola was there to support her. He always followed her to antenatal and was with her at the theater when she gave birth to a baby girl, whom they named Fumaleo, after Ademola's mother. The family thrived to the admiration of everyone. With the support of her husband, Adetola used her inheritance to start a foundation in her late parents' name. At the launching of the foundation, Adetola could not hold back her tears as she pondered on her journey so far and what she had survived. She used the foundation to help homeless orphans, paying school fees of less privileged students, ensuring that no child would have to endure the struggles she had faced. As she stood beside Ademola, watching their daughter play in the garden, Adetola felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had found love, family, and a purpose, and she knew that her parents would be proud of her in their graves. If you like this story, comment, like, share and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. I will like to read your view about this story.